Man, a lot of us were mad this morning or last night, depending on when we heard the news. I remember years ago I worked for Rogers, and every year we would do a performance review where you'd have to rank yourself between 1 and 5 based on a bunch of different categories and go sit down with your boss and justify why you gave yourself those scores. Now, every year I would give myself a 5 in something. And every year I was told by my boss, nobody gets 5s. 5s means you're perfect. You can't have a 5. Then why is it an option, Steve? Now, I don't remember it ever being said explicitly, but we all understood that those reviews had a direct effect on our annual increases if we were going to get a raise. Now, every year I would do okay. I would get 4s, maybe, a high 3 or something like that overall in my performance review. And every year I would have to fight for a 2% raise. Now, I didn't always get 2%, but I would always fight for one. Most of the time I'd end up between, let's say, 1.3 and about 2%, which would equate to about $7 a pay. I think that's how raises work for most of us, right? You go in, you sit down with your boss, you push for a number, your boss brings that down a little bit because there's only so much money to go around, which is why I think so many of us were so frustrated when we read that this motherfucker got a 56% increase last year. Before I go too deep into it, I want to clarify a couple of things that I think some people have been mistaken about. There are people that are saying that this raise just happened. That's not true. See, this money is actually what he made last year, but we're just finding out about it now, which is why there's so much shock and awe. Also, I've seen it reported that his salary was increased by 55%. That's not true either. You got to keep in mind, these guys get paid very differently than the rest of us. Yeah, salary is a part of it, but the bigger chunks are actually stock options and bonuses. And that's a big amount of the $8.4 million that Galen made last year. But I think what makes it even more frustrating for a lot of people is when we find out how it happened. See, back in 2020, Loblaws, the company that Galen's family runs, hired a consulting firm to come in basically to check to see if they're paying their executives enough. And shockingly enough, they found that they weren't. So that's kind of what prompted this big increase. And just to be clear, that 56% increase that I mentioned equates to about $3 million in total compensation. And that's just from Loblaws. See, I'm not even talking about how he runs his family trust and makes a couple of $1 million a year from that too. I mean, honestly, Galen Weston makes a metric butt ton of money, which is an actual value that you can look up. Seriously, metric butt ton. Google it. So just to kind of wrap things up, last year, Loblaws paid their head guy $8.4 million. They made $1.9 billion in profit, but they can't afford to drop the price of a loaf of bread by $1, so we have an easier time making grilled cheese. Thanks a lot, Loblaws.